Hi, thank you for coming to the GCP portion of this regulatory update given by FDA Quality and Regulatory Consultants, LLC. For the next couple minutes, we'll go over any new regulations or guidances that are coming out that had occurred during the 2018 period and that will trickle into this new year. Mainly just to ensure your awareness as you're doing your audits and going out to different vendors. Wanted to ensure that you also gain some knowledge and insight to what's upcoming, and then applying those different new rules and regulations to your agenda and plan, making your audits more effective and being able to provide that knowledge to the different sites and facilities that you go to. The topics that will be focused on will be related to the revised Common Rule, the 2018 proposed regulations and draft guidance, patient engagement in clinical trials. We'll go over some pharmacovigilance objectives, laws governing pharmacovigilance, and then new rules related to pharmacovigilance IT systems and processes. The first major update that I'd like to go into is related to the revised federal policy for the protection of human subjects, known as the Common Rule. So the Common Rule has been adopted by HHS and 15 federal agencies. So this is not just specific to your U.S. Food and Drug Administration. The compliance date is January 21st, 2019. So in many cases, the Common Rule changes will not impact ongoing research that you might be reviewing. With that said, for those studies that were approved before January 2019, the pre-2018 Common Rule regulations will continue to apply to the study. For anything that was approved on January 21st of 2019 or afterwards, they must adhere to the new revised Common Rule. So the major changes that you'll see within the revised Common Rule include changes in the definitions of research as well as human subject, new exempt categories, revised informed consent requirements, and then IRB changes in review. So what you'll probably see when you're at sites doing your audits or facilities is new methods of submitting a protocol. You'll most likely see changes in standard operating procedures and most definitely see changes in the informed consent template revision. So in order to understand the regulatory text of the revised Common Rule, I highly recommend reviewing the preamble and regulatory text from the following that I have listed down below. So that would include the revised Common Rule, which was published back in 2017, the interim final rule that was published in 2018, which is a great document because it gives you the different questions and answers, as well as comments that were provided by different sponsors and sites. So it's very informative and great information. And then the final June 19, 2018 provisions of the 2018 requirement. All very good resources to go to gain more knowledge. So one of the major highlights I had mentioned is related to the change in definition. So the first one is related to research. The revised common rule adds a provision that identifies 4 types of activities as not being researched as defined in the rule. There's certain scholarly and journalistic activities, certain public health surveillance activities, collection and analysis of information, specimens or records by or for a criminal justice agency for certain criminal justice or investigative purposes, and certain authorized operational activities for national security purposes. So within the common rule 45 CFR 46-102, research means a systematic investigation, including research development, testing, and evaluation designed to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge. Now, if we talk about human subject, the regulatory definition of human subject remains substantively the same, but in the revised common rule, the word data is replaced with information or biospecimens for clarity. So within the common rule, again, 45 CFR 46-102, human subject means a living individual about whom an investigator, whether professional or student, conducting research, 1, obtains information or biospecimens through intervention or interaction with the individual and uses, studies, or analyzes the information or biospecimens, or 2, obtains, uses, studies, analyzes, or generates identifiable private information or identifiable biospecimens. So now if we move on to the new requirements for consent form, the general requirements for informed consent have been changed to provide key information and promote autonomy by ensuring prospective subjects receive the information needed to make an informed decision. These changes are addressed in the concise summary section. So changes to informed consent general requirements include informed consent must give prospective subjects the information that a reasonable person would want to have in order to make an informed decision. Information must be presented in a way that facilitates an understanding of why one might or might not want to participate. The informed consent form should not simply list isolated facts, but instead should help people process complicated information, and key information such as the study's purpose, risks, benefits, and alternatives must be provided at the beginning of the consent form. So the new elements that are also added to the informed consent form are required for all studies. In the statement about whether participants' information or biospecimens might or will not be stripped of identifiers and used for future resource must be included in all new consent form templates. Other elements of the informed consent that's also applicable are related to information about possible commercial profit, information about whether clinically relevant research results will be returned to the subjects, and information about whether research activities will or might include whole genome sequencing. And then some changes to the waiver of informed consents. When identifiable biospecimens or private information are involved, the IRB must determine that the research cannot practically be conducted without the use of the identifiable information. So if the research could be done using non-identifiable information, then that is what should be done. And then just an expansion on when signed informed consent is not required. The IRB may waive the requirement for a signed informed consent form when the subjects are members of a distinct cultural group or community in which signing forms is not the norm, and the research involves no more than minimal risk. And there is an alternative method for documenting that consent was obtained, such as like in the progress notes, etc. So again, just something that you want to keep in mind. Now, if we look at new revised exempt category lists, while in the pre-2018 rule, there are approximately 6 to 8 exemptions that you'll see between the pre-2018 rule and the revised common rule. Basically, they were put in place, to ensure safeguards are there, and studies are using the right interventions within their studies. So exemption 1 are related to educational practices where research in established or commonly accepted educational settings that involve certain normal educational practices such as research on instructional techniques already in use or classroom management. So a new restriction to the applicability of this educational practices exemption requires that the research must also not be likely to adversely impact the student's opportunity to learn the required educational content or the assessment of educators who provide the instruction. Which leads us to the exemption 2, which is related to educational tests, surveys, interviews, observation of public behavior. There are 3 primary changes to this. There's an addition that this only includes interactions involving educational tests, surveys, interviews, and observation of public behavior. This exemption 2 is not applicable to research involving interventions. So you want to take note of that. The second primary change is the addition to second criterion, requiring that the disclosure of the subject's responses outside the research would not reasonably be damaging to the subject's educational advancement. And then the third allows for the use of the limited IRB review where identifiable information, even if sensitive, is recorded. Exemption 3 is related to your benign behavioral interventions, which is a new option where research involving benign behavioral interventions with adults who prospectively agree to the research when the information collected is limited to verbal or written responses, including data entry or audiovisual recordings. A benign behavioral intervention must be brief in duration, although data collection may take longer. Also, the intervention must be harmless, painless, and not physically invasive. Further, the intervention must not be likely to have a significant adverse lasting impact on subjects. The investigator must have no reason to believe that the intervention will be offensive or embarrassing to the subjects and should take into consideration the subject's population, the context of the research, the topic, and other characteristics of the study. Exemption 4 is related to your research on existing data. So secondary research use of identifiable private information or identifiable biospecimens. One change in the revised common rule is that the private information and biospecimens no longer have to be in existence prior to the start of the research, but must meet one of the applicability provisions. The next is related to public benefit service, expanded to include research that is also supported by a federal department or agency, for example, through a grant or funding. There's also a new requirement for the federal entity conducting or sponsoring the research to publish a publicly available list of the projects that are covered by this exemption before research begins. And then we have an exemption related to storage and maintenance of secondary research collected under broad consent. So this covers storage or maintenance of identifiable private information or identifiable biospecimens for secondary research. And then lastly, as the secondary research for broad consent is required. So this covers the secondary research use of identifiable private information or identifiable biospecimens originally obtained for non-research purposes or for research other than the current proposal. And then there are different requirements that must be satisfied within that you can review within the different resources I have mentioned. Now, if we look at the different IRB changes, more notably is related to the continuing review. So this will no longer be required for many studies that are approved as minimally risk. So some minimal risk studies will no longer require the annual review. The IRB should start beginning identifying applicable studies. You probably should see changes in that at the latter part of 2018 and definitely now for 2019. IRB approval letters and consent forms should document that the study qualifies for extended approval under the common rule and therefore should not expire in the future. So you should see that in the approval letters that the sites are getting, if it's applicable. Extended approval should require, or you should see that they will require modifications be submitted to the IRB prior to implementing changes. And events that meet prompt reporting criteria must be reported to the IRB in 5 to 10 days. So again, you should see these changes within any revised SOPs or plans, etc. And then extended approval is not being considered for studies that involve FDA regulated components or FDA oversight, prisoners, stem cells, or SCRO protocols. For our limited IRB review is a process that is now required only for certain exemptions. So in limited IRB review, the IRB must determine that certain conditions, primarily that adequate provisions are in place to protect the privacy of subjects and maintain confidentiality of the data, and making sure that that is all met. And then with our single IRB, most federally funded collaborative research projects based in the U.S. will be required to use a single IRB effective January 2020. As of January 2015, NIH policy has required the use of single IRB. So you'll see if you're going to those types of facilities that are implementing the NIH requirements, then those would have started earlier. So here you'll see some of the 2018 proposed regulations and draft guidances that are out there for commenting that correlate to the different and new requirements that came out with the common rule. So the first is related to the IRB waiver or any alteration of informed consent for minimally risk clinical investigations. And the next is related to the IRB waiver, again, an alteration of informed consent. So comments have been due, so we should be able to see any type of new docket that comes out related to those and any new changes. And then some other additional proposed regulations and draft guidances I listed here that came out latter part of 2018. One relating to your clinicaltrials.gov databank and any civil money penalties. And then the other is for pregnant women and the scientific and ethical considerations for inclusion in the clinical trials. So you can find these within the FDA website and very informative reading. And then lastly, some draft guidances to promote the clinical trial design efficacy. In September of 2018, the FDA released 2 draft guidances for industry. So really the purpose was or is to modernize the approach to clinical trial design in efforts to make clinical trials more efficient while maintaining patient safety and to increase the amount of information concerning product safety and benefits. So the 2 draft guidances are for master protocols efficient clinical trial design strategies to expedite development of cancer drugs and biologics, and then it's adaptive designs for clinical trials of drug and biologics. The master protocol guidance provides FDA recommendations to the sponsors or industry that desire the opportunity to run several related oncology studies concurrently under a master protocol. It's defined as a protocol designed with multiple sub-studies which may have different objectives and involves coordinated efforts to evaluate one or more investigational drugs in one or more disease subtypes within the overall trial structure. So this would give sponsors the ability to expand the reach of their oncology clinical studies to observe safety and efficacy in multiple subtype populations, disease subtypes, drug combinations, and or even different dosages. Master protocols may be utilized to provide data for exploratory purposes or just to support a marketing application. Generally, running an oncology trial with a master protocol potentially benefits the sponsor by allowing the sponsor to concurrently evaluate multiple studies that have different objectives, thus potentially saving time and cost as compared to running the separate clinical trials. So this is a great move forward that's being available for industry. Now, of course, with your benefits, there's always challenges that, if not properly addressed, can increase the risk to study subjects or delay the development of the product. So I think this is why FDA has released, the guidance to provide the recommendation to sponsors that are considering incorporating a master protocol into their clinical trial design. And this will help avoid any unnecessary delays in their IND review process. An adaptive design is a clinical trial design that allows for prospectively planned modifications to one or more aspects of the design based on the accumulating data from subjects in the trial. So the ability to make changes to a study in progress allows investigators to take into account new information that was not known when the study began. So according to FDA, the adaptive designs can both provide a greater chance to detect a true drug effect and reduce the number of patients exposed to ineffective investigational treatments, since effectiveness will be more easily detected earlier in the trial. So because adaptive designs allow for greater flexibility, they also may be more acceptable to those conducting and those participating in the clinical trials. So for sponsors in particular, adaptive designs could potentially both save time and reduce costs, such as with our master protocols. So adaptive designs can also have ethical advantages by facilitating early termination of trials once it becomes clear that a trial is unlikely to demonstrate effectiveness, thereby minimizing the risk to participants. So again, these are great things to look forward to in the future. Next, I'd like to talk a little bit about patient engagement in clinical trials. So we've seen in recent years, patient engagement in clinical trials has emerged and is an increasingly important aspect of successful clinical trials. Across all involved groups, sponsors, academics, regulators, and patients, the primary goal of clinical trials is to more rapidly answer research questions and deliver safe, effective treatments to patients. Patient engagement is essential to accomplishing this goal. I think from 2007, inception of the Clinical Trials Transformation Initiatives, also known as the CTTI, multiple stakeholder engagement models, patients have been included as valued partners, serving on governance committees and project teams. I know I've been to a few summits where I've had the pleasure of hearing patients talk about their experiences in clinical trials and the different challenges that they had seen or things that they had wished had happened as far as communication and being informed etc., which, has helped transform different areas of how trials are being conducted today. And then over the past decade, as patient groups involvement in clinical trials has continued to increase and diversify, the CTTI has not only recognized the crucial role patients play in improving the clinical trial enterprise, but also has made a deep commitment to help grow and shape the emerging field of patient engagement. So again, this is a great path forward for clinical trials. In the document that was released, it defines patient engagement in medical device clinical trials. It explains the value and positive impact of engaging patients in the design, conduct, and communication of clinical trials. It discusses barriers and challenges in engaging patients for clinical trials, and it outlines how and when sponsors can engage patients in the design and conduct of the clinical trials. Again, like we were talking about with the adaptive design in clinical trials, this helps keep enrollment and it helps with informative data that is given out to the public. So some of them patient engagement areas that may help address common device trial challenges related to faster patient recruitment, better patient retention, fewer protocol revisions, fewer protocol deviations and violations, better quality data, and then more relevant data on outcomes that matter to patients and demonstrate value to payers and healthcare systems. Now I'd like to go into the PV portion of this regulatory update. So here, just want to give a quick overview. So within the pharmacovigilance world, the objectives of the program is for early detection of unknown safety problems, detection of increases in frequency, identification of risk factors, quantifying risks, and preventing patients from being affected unnecessarily. The laws governing the pharmacovigilance programs are with non-specific laws pertaining to the collection of adverse event data would be within your Directive 2001-20 EC, as well as in your FDA 21 CFR Part 312-32. And then laws specific to pharmacovigilance in the European Union, which is much more extensive, are listed below. So you have your registration, 1235-2010, Directive 2012, Commission Implementing Regulation, your regulation number 1027, and then 2 additional directives, and then the regulation number 726. So in the next couple slides, I also like to give an update for those that are involved in the pharmacovigilance world related to the updates for IT systems as well as pharmacovigilance processes. First, within the IT systems, we have our Article 57 database. So what's new? On the 30th of July in 2018, the agency published a subset of information contained in Article 57 database of medicinal products. So the data was published in accordance with Article 26, 1E of Regulation number 726-2004, which creates a legal requirement to publish the contact details for pharmacovigilance inquiries and of the locations in European Union where the pharmacovigilance system master files are kept. In addition, several other data fields are included in the publication to provide context to the data, making the full list of data fields published as follows. So you would have your product short name, brand name, or the combination of the generic name and the company name, the active substance, route of administration, authorization country, name of the marketing authorization holder, country of location in the EU where the pharmacovigilance system master file is kept, pharmacovigilance inquiries, contact email address, and the pharmacovigilance inquiries contact telephone number. So what do you need to know about this data release? It lists the medicinal products at product short name level authorized in the EU submitted by the MAHs, or the marketing authorization holders, to the Article 57 database. Only information on products that have a valid marketing authorization status is included in the publication. In addition, it provides the public with a dedication point of contact within the MAH regarding any safety concerns related to individual medicinal products listed in the Article 57 database. And then allows EU citizens to know what products are authorized. It helps facilitate the activities of the Name Review Group, or the NRG, whose main role is to consider whether the name of the product or name proposed by a product's manufacturer could create a public health concern or a potential safety risk. And then it also enables pharmaceutical industry to provide a better assessment of potential invented names. So what do MAHs, or marketing authorization holders, need to do? They've already been informed regarding the publication of Article 57 data, and they were also given an opportunity to check their entries. MAHs must also submit information to the EMA on authorized medicines, and they have to keep this information up to date in accordance with the EU pharmaceutical regulation. All right, some other IT systems that we should note is related to the user vigilance. The new EV system was launched in November of 2017. It now holds information on more than, I think, 12 million safety reports, and it refers to close to 8 million cases, as well as information on a little less than 750,000 medicinal products in the EU market. So it's a lot of information in there. The EV provides enhanced functionalities to the national competent authorities and marketing authorization holders for effective reporting, as well as extensive data set for monitoring of adverse drug reactions and detection of risks related to the safety medicines. Some of the major achievements in 2018, on the 26th of July in 2018, the EMA integrated the services of the EV with EMA's account management portal, as well as their organization management service. The new platform simplifies the registration and management of organizations and users interacting with the EV. And then as far as what sponsors need to know, all EV users, including organizations, need to activate the EMA account created through the EMA account management portal. So to ensure a smooth transition, the EMA has published a registration manual for companies and users wishing to register with, access, or manage their account for EV. And then following the EV platform integration with the EMA account management portal and OMS, the agency has reinforced its support to EV users. There's different contact emails that can be found on the website, and then also some training materials as well. Now if we move into some of the updates related to the pharmacovigilance processes, when we're talking about the quinolone and fluoroquinolone antibiotics, what's new in that is that there was a public hearing that was held in June of 2018 regarding any medicinal products that contain any of these two chemicals or products. The quinolones and fluoroquinolones are a class of antibiotics which are widely prescribed in the EU and are important for treating serious life-threatening bacterial infections. There is a summary report of the EMA public hearing on this subject for both of the antibiotics. The public hearing was held as part of a safety review by the PRAC, investigating the persistence of serious side effects with the two antibiotics, mainly affecting muscles, joints, and the nervous system. But in particular, the PRAC was interested to hear the public's view on acceptability of the risks associated with the two antibiotics, both mild and severe infections, and to explore what further measures could be taken to ensure that these antibiotics are used as safely as possible. So as you're reviewing the different adverse event databases and reporting at different facilities, just making sure that you're looking into both of these and not seeing any types of trends within the mild and severe infections categories. So what's coming? So after the public hearing, the PRAC will continue its review according to its published timeline, which again you can find on the website. Once the assessment is finalized, the PRAC report on the safety of quinolones and fluoroquinolones will be published. So this will help guide pharmacovigilance companies on their reporting and maintaining and analyzing of the data. Another process that I think is notable is related to the enhancing independence and transparency in observational medical research. This is a growing area. So in March of 2018, the European Network of Centers for Pharmacoepidemiology and Pharmacovigilance adopted the fourth revision of its Code of Conduct that basically sets out the principles to be applied to ensure scientific independence and transparency in the two types of research. So how is this relevant to you? The provisions of the code apply to medical research that is fully or partially financed from external sources. For example, studies that are commissioned by pharmaceutical companies or research grants, etc. Basically where researchers or study funders and other involved parties agree to adhere to the code.
Your feedback is valuable for us to improve future training sessions. To receive a training certificate, please complete the survey at this link. Thank you very much.